Sydney was 11 years old the summer her mother decided she was old enough to be independent. That was the word her mom used, smiling too brightly in the doorway as the taxi waited outside. Independent. Like it was a gift. Like it was something you earned instead of something forced on you when no one wanted to stay. Sydney stood in the narrow hallway clutching the strap of her worn backpack, toes curled against the cold tile. She was still small enough that the suitcase beside her mother looked enormous. Black, hard-sided, wheels clicking impatiently as if even it was eager to leave. Her mom smelled like perfume and airport coffee. Europe, she'd said. Month. Maybe longer. This is good for you, she'd added, bending down to press a quick kiss to Sydney's hair. Already half turned toward the door, no babysitter arrived. No neighbor was introduced. No list was taped to the fridge. Instead, her mother pressed a single folded bill into her palm. $20. It felt too light to mean anything at all. If there's an emergency, her mom said casually, digging through her purse, use the credit card. Sydney nodded because nodding was what she did when adults spoke in confident voices. She didn't ask questions. She didn't ask how to cook or who to call or what counted as an emergency. She told herself she was fine. She told herself she was grown. Her hands shook anyway. The taxi door slammed. The engine started. Her mother waved through the window, still smiling, like this was just another errand. Then the car pulled away, and the house fell silent in a way Sydney had never heard before. The quiet wasn't peaceful. It was hollow. She stood there for a long time before locking the door, the sound echoing too loudly in the empty space. The walls felt bigger without another adult inside them. The kitchen clock ticked like it was counting down something she couldn't see. Later that night, hungry and scared enough to feel sick, Sydney unfolded the credit card envelope. Her fingers were clumsy as she slid the card out, heart racing with relief, until she saw the crack running straight through the magnetic strip. She tried it anyway. Machine beep. Declined. That was the moment it hit her. Not when the suitcase rolled out the door. Not when the house went quiet. But standing under flickering fluorescent lights with $20 in her pocket and a broken promise in her hand. This wasn't independence. This was abandonment dressed up as confidence. Sydney swallowed hard, squared her shoulders, and whispered the lie she would repeat to herself for weeks. I will be fine. Sydney decided on the first morning that she would treat it like a game. Games had rules. Games had winners. Games meant control. She stood on a chair to reach the counter, spreading peanut butter so thin across a slice of bread that the knife scraped loudly against the plate. One slice for the morning. One for the afternoon. If she cut them in half, she told herself, it would last longer. She even laughed once, a small sound that bounced off the kitchen walls, pretending this was fun. Pretending this was something kids did on purpose. Day 1 was easy enough to lie to herself. By day 3, the game stopped being funny. The pantry looked different when she really saw it. Not full, just loud. A few dented cans with labels peeling off, all expired. A cereal box that felt full until she opened it and realized it was mostly air. A single jar of pickles she hated, sitting on the bottom shelf like a joke. No milk. No bread left. No plan. Her stomach growled so loudly it startled her. The sound filled the house, embarrassing even though no one was there to hear it. She pressed her palm against her belly, dizzy when she stood too fast, light-headed enough that the corners of the room blurred. She sat on the floor and waited for it to pass. That's when she noticed her mother's laptop on the desk, still open like it had been forgotten in a hurry. The screen flickered to life when Sydney touched the trackpad. Emails popped up. Work things, flight confirmations, meetings scheduled weeks ahead. Proof that this wasn't an accident. This was planned. Her hands shook harder than before. She grabbed a spiral notebook from her backpack, the one meant for summer math worksheets. Instead, she wrote at the top of the first page in uneven letters. Day 3. Then she listed everything. What she ate. What time she woke up. How much money was left. How the credit card didn't work. How hungry she felt. It didn't feel like journaling. It felt like collecting facts. That night, she found her mom's old phone propped in a drawer. The battery still worked. Sydney set it up on the kitchen counter, sat cross-legged on the floor, and pressed record. Her face filled the screen, paler than she remembered, eyes too big. "It's day 3, she whispered, glancing at the door like someone might hear her. "I'm alone. Have $12 left. I'm not supposed to tell anyone." Her voice cracked, and she hated that the camera caught it. She stopped the recording, heart racing. For a long moment, she stared at the screen of her own face. Frozen and small, Emma's name sat in her phone contacts. Her best friend. The person who would believe her. Sydney hovered her thumb over the screen, imagining the text. "My mom went to Europe and left me alone." The words felt too heavy to send. If she told Emma, it would be real. It would mean admitting the truth out loud, so she didn't text. Instead, she opened the notebook again and turned the page. From that moment on, survival wasn't the goal anymore. Remembering was that I thought about my best friend Emma, but if I texted her, I'd have to admit my mom left me. Instead, I started recording. Because this wasn't just about surviving anymore. This was about making sure everyone would know what they did. By day 5, Sydney's thoughts felt like they were wrapped in cotton. Standing up too fast made the room tilt, dark spots blooming in her vision. She learned to move slowly, one hand always brushing the wall for balance. Her stomach no longer growled the way it had at first. It ached instead, a dull, constant pressure that never went away. The cereal box sat on the counter, half empty now. No bowl, no milk. She ate it dry, straight from the bag, counting each handful before forcing herself to stop. Crumbs stuck to her fingers. She licked them off, embarrassed by how desperate it felt. Even though she was still alone, her notebook was getting thicker. Day 5. Still no call from Mom. Money left. $6. Food, cereal, pickles, still didn't eat them. She wrote smaller now, tighter, like if she compressed the words enough they would hurt less. The entries weren't emotional. They were precise. She filmed another video, her voice quieter but steadier, listing everything the camera couldn't feel. The dizziness, the way her legs shook when she climbed the stairs, how cold the house felt even in summer. The bottom of the page. She wrote one sentence and stared at it for a long time before underlining it twice. "If I disappear, this will prove it wasn't my fault." That was the moment something shifted. Not in her body, which was still weak, but in her chest. She stopped waiting for her mother to come back or call or remember. Waiting made you small. Recording made you solid. This wasn't just about getting through the days anymore. This was about consequences. By day 7, the hunger was sharper, but so was something else. Anger. It sat in her stomach beside the emptiness, warmer and stronger. She filmed again, even though her hands trembled holding the phone. She showed the pantry shelves. The empty fridge. The calendar with a bright circle around the day her mom had left. Then she went to the front window. Outside, a family walked past, laughing. A dad carried grocery bags. A mom adjusted a kid's backpack. Felt like watching a different world through glass. Sydney pressed her forehead against the cool window and whispered, so softly she almost didn't hear herself. "You chose Europe over me." Her reflection stared back, thinner, harder. "Do you know what that's going to cost you?" She turned back to the table, to the notebook, to the camera. Her body might have been failing her, but her resolve wasn't. Every page, every clip, every quiet fact was becoming something undeniable. If you were 11, starving and completely alone, would you open that door or would you keep pretending everything was fine? The doorbell rang just after noon on day 8. Sydney froze. Her first thought was that her mom had come back early. Her second was that it was a mistake, someone at the wrong house. She stood in the middle of the living room, heart pounding so hard it made her dizzy, listening to the echo fade. Then it rang again. She wiped her hands on her shorts and walked to the door on shaking legs. Through the peephole, she saw a familiar face framed by a green jacket with the school emblem stitched over the chest. Amar Hughes, the school counselor. Hope and fear collided so fast it made her chest hurt. If she opened the door, everything would change. If she didn't, maybe she could keep pretending a little longer. She imagined lying, saying her mom was upstairs, saying everything was fine. She had protected her mother her whole life without realizing that was what she'd been doing. Sydney unlocked the door. Hughes smiled at first, The polite, uncertain smile adults wear when they aren't sure they're welcome. "Hi, Sydney," he said gently. "Your teacher was worried when you didn't check in online." Sydney stepped back and held the door open. "Come in." The smell of stale air and empty rooms hit him immediately. He glanced around, eyes catching on the bare counter, the sink stacked with unwashed dishes, the cereal box left open on the table. Evidence she hadn't meant to show was everywhere. "Is anyone else home?" he asked. Sydney shook her head. "Just me. They said I was old enough." Something in his face changed. The friendly concern hardened into something heavier, more focused. "How long have you been alone?" "A week," she said, then corrected herself. "Almost. And food." She swallowed. "I had $20. And a card that doesn't work." Mr. Hughes didn't look at his clipboard. He didn't write anything down. He just stared at her, and it wasn't the look teachers gave when homework was missing. It was the look adults gave when something was wrong in a way that couldn't be ignored. "This is not okay," he said quietly. "You know that, right?" Sydney nodded, and the truth rushed out before she could stop it. "I've been hungry. And scared. And I've been writing things down." She gestured toward the notebook on the table. "Just in case something happens to me." He picked it up carefully, like it was fragile. The word he used next sounded too big for the kitchen, too sharp to belong to her life. "Neglect." He explained what it meant. Not as an insult, as a fact. Leaving a child without supervision, without food, without a plan. He talked about child protective services, investigations, serious consequences. Words like duty and responsibility and endangerment floated in the air. Then he crouched down so they were eye level. "Do you want help, Sydney? Real help?" She hesitated, then asked the question she'd been holding inside her since the taxi drove away. "What does that mean for them?" Mr. Hughes didn't flinch. "It means they'll have to answer for their choices." Sydney took a breath that felt deeper than any she'd taken all week. "Yes," she said. "I want help. If you were in my place, would you keep protecting your parents, or would you finally let the truth become the weapon they never saw coming?" Mr. Hughes didn't waste time. He stood in the kitchen with his back half-turned, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in low, serious fragments that floated toward Sydney like pieces of a puzzle. "Yes, I'm here now. No adult supervision. Food insecurity at minimum. I'll stay until someone arrives." Each pause made her stomach tighten, but something else was happening too. The world was finally moving. Another call. A knock at the door. Mrs. Johnson stepped inside with a kind of urgency that made her seem taller than she was. She took one look around, at the empty counter, the open cereal box, Sydney's thin frame, and her mouth pressed into a hard line. "Oh, sweetheart," she said softly. Then, quieter, firmer. "Why didn't you come to me sooner?" Sydney stared at the floor. "I didn't want to look weak." Mrs. Johnson knelt in front of her immediately, hands warm on Sydney's arms. "Asking for help isn't weakness," she said. "It's survival." They sat at the table together while Sydney told everything from the beginning. The suitcase by the door. Fake smile. The $20 bill. "You'll be fine, you're my little adult." Each detail made Mrs. Johnson's jaw clench tighter, made Mr. Hughes pull out his notebook and start writing. When Sydney slid her own spiral notebook across the table, the room went quiet. "This is evidence," Mr. Hughes said carefully, flipping through the pages. "Keep writing. So they can't twist it later." He looked at Sydney directly. "Protect yourself with the truth." The words landed heavy and powerful. It sounded a little like revenge, and Sydney realized she didn't hate that feeling at all. The caseworker arrived less than an hour later. She walked through the house without saying much, but her face said everything. She opened the fridge and closed it again. She examined the credit card, cracked and useless. She peered into the trash can, too clean, too empty, only a few wrappers at the bottom. "When was the last time you spoke to your mother?" she asked. "Not since the airport," Sydney said. She sent a selfie from Paris with a heart emoji. The caseworker nodded once. While the adult spoke, Sydney set the phone on the counter and recorded quietly. The camera caught the empty shelves, the calendar, the serious faces. Later she whispered into it, "This is what our house looked like when they finally noticed." That afternoon, Mrs. Johnson packed a small suitcase for her. Clothes that fit. Toothbrush. Real food waiting at the end of the day. "We'll take her," Mrs. Johnson said without hesitation. The caseworker agreed. Temporary placement. Sydney stood in the doorway and looked back at the house that had swallowed a week of her life. When they asked if she was okay with the plan, she nodded once and said the truth she'd been building toward all along. "I want to stay somewhere I'm not invisible." The second morning at Mrs. Johnson's house smelled like toast and eggs. Sydney woke up under a real blanket, the kind that tucked around your shoulders instead of slipping off in the night. Sunlight came through the curtains. The kitchen hummed with normal sounds. Coffee pouring, a pan sizzling, someone moving around without rushing out the door. Safety had a smell, she realized, and it smelled like breakfast IT made the last week feel unreal, like something that had happened to another kid. But reality had a way of catching up. They all knew her parents would have to come back eventually. Europe wasn't forever. And the longer things stayed quiet, the louder the fallout would be when it came. The phone rang just after lunch. Not her mom's personal number. Her work phone. Sydney stared at the screen until her hand started to shake. Mrs. Johnson was at the table sorting papers from the caseworker. She looked up and nodded once, calm and steady. "Speaker," she said gently. Sydney answered. "What is this woman from Child Services emailing me?" her mother snapped, skipping any greeting. "Why is your school involved? Do you have any idea what this looks like for me?" The words hit fast, sharp. "No, are you okay? No, are you safe?" Sydney swallowed. "They're involved because you left me." There was a scoff on the other end of the line. "That's ridiculous. You're exaggerating. There was plenty of food. You've always been so dramatic." Sydney's hands trembled, but her voice didn't break. "I was alone. For over a week. I cannot believe you'd turn people against us," her mother continued, voice rising. "Our reputation. Do you have any idea what this could do to us?" Mrs. Johnson leaned forward. "I bought your daughter groceries because there was almost nothing left in the house," she said calmly. There was a pause. Then fury. "Why are you interfering? This is a family matter." Sydney felt something solid settle in her chest. "I wasn't fine," she said. "I'm not fine with what you did." The silence that followed was colder than yelling. "We're going to have a very serious conversation about consequences, young lady," her mother said tightly. The line went dead. Sydney stared at the phone, heart pounding, waiting for the familiar wave of guilt. It didn't come. Mrs. Johnson reached over and squeezed her hand. "She's right," she said softly. "There will be consequences. But not just for you." Sydney opened her notebook and wrote the time, the date, and exactly what had been said. Another video followed. Another piece of truth locked in place. Why Mom was right about one thing. There would be consequences. But she had no idea they'd be hers to face. They pulled Sydney out of class just after lunch. The caseworker stood in the doorway with a tight, professional smile that made every kid nearby stare. Sydney packed her bag in silence, heart thudding, already knowing this wouldn't be good news. And the hallway, the words came fast and flat. "Your parents moved their flight up. They'll be home in 3 days. 3 days. Not 3 weeks like they'd planned. Not when they missed her. Not because they were worried. Because Child Services was involved." The realization settled heavy in her chest. They weren't coming back for her. They were coming back to protect themselves. "What happens when they get here?" Sydney asked. "There will be a meeting," the caseworker said. "Me, my supervisor, Mr. Hughes. And you." Sydney didn't hesitate. "I want to be there. I want them to see me." The next 2 days weren't about rehearsing speeches or imagining apologies. They were about organizing facts. Truth didn't need drama. It needed order. Receipts were printed. Screenshots of unanswered calls. Call logs showing silence. Copies of the notebook entries. Timestamps. The $20 bill. flattened and tucked into a clear sleeve like an artifact. Her written statement sat on top, neat and steady, the opposite of how she felt inside. "This is about making sure you're safe," the caseworker reminded her. Sydney nodded. But she knew the difference between justice and holding up a mirror. One punished, the other forced people to see themselves. The morning they returned, Sydney walked back into the house. It smelled like stale air and dust, like a place that had been holding its breath. The kitchen looked smaller than she remembered. On the table sat a thick folder, heavy enough to feel permanent. Her notebook lay open to the page marked evidence. The phone rested beside it, paused on the day 3 video. Her own face staring back, eyes hollow, voice mid-confession. "She always says stories don't matter unless there's proof," Sydney said quietly to Mrs. Johnson stood in the doorway, steady as ever. Mr. Hughes leaned against the counter. The supervisor took the chair at the table, pen ready, outside. Tires crunched on gravel, car doors slammed. Laughter, muffled, careless, floated through the walls. The caseworker met Sydney's eyes. "You don't have to protect them from the truth anymore." The front door handle turned. They walked in laughing. Stylish clothes, sun-kissed skin. The light, easy energy of people who expected applause for returning early. For a split second, Sydney almost believed they might hug her, tell her they missed her, act like this was a misunderstanding that could be smoothed over. Then they saw the room. They stopped dead. Hughes by the counter. Mrs. Johnson near the doorway. A woman Sydney didn't know seated at the table with a folder open. Another standing beside her. "What is this?" her mother demanded, the smile vanishing. "What are you doing in my kitchen?" "I'm Ms. Lopez," the woman said calmly. "Child Protective Services." Her mother's eyes snapped to Sydney. "Sydney, what did you tell them?" The old instinct surged. To shrink, to apologize, to protect. It lived deep in her bones. But it didn't win. "I told them the truth." Her dad forced a laugh that sounded wrong even to him. "She's very mature," he said quickly. "Kids are capable these days." The supervisor slid documents across the table. Photos of the empty fridge. The deactivated emergency card. Call logs with unanswered days highlighted. "Expired food doesn't mean starving," her mother said, sinking into a chair. "One photo from the airport," the supervisor continued evenly. "One selfie from Paris. No direct check-ins with your child." Her dad went pale. "We told you to order food," he said to Sydney. "We trusted you." Sydney's voice was steady. "You trusted me to survive. You didn't trust yourselves to be parents." Mrs. Johnson spoke softly but clearly. She was dizzy from hunger. Her mother waved a hand. "She's being dramatic with her notes. She likes to write." Sydney reached for the phone. The video played. "Day 3, her recorded voice said, thin and exhausted. "I'm still alone. If you're seeing this, someone finally asked what happened." Her mother covered her mouth, stumbling back. "No," she whispered. "No, this cannot be happening." "It already has," the supervisor said. "This is determined as neglect under state law. We're issuing an emergency order." "You can't take my child over a misunderstanding," her mother cried. Sydney stepped forward. "You always told me actions have consequences," she said quietly. "This is what your choice looks like." Her mother turned to her, desperate. "Tell them you want to come home." "I want to be safe," Sydney replied. "I want to be somewhere I'm seen before I disappear." The placement stayed